I'm James Fernando. I'm the Regulatory Reporting Director working for Societe Generale Global Solution Center in Bucharest. And I manage a team producing regulatory reports for the group's European subsidiaries. And we're serving around 20 odd countries across Western Europe.
So tell us more about Societe Generale Global Solution Center in Bucharest. What are the main areas where you work, and what kind of project do you develop here in Bucharest?
So the Global Solution Center in Bucharest has been based in Romania for over 12 years now, and it covers 5 main areas of activity. We have a shared service center around finance and accounting, one around human resources, one around information technology, around know your customer, and around compliance. The service center is serving around 35 countries for the group worldwide. And in particular on the finance shared service center where I'm based, we have around 440 finance professionals covering 4 main areas of activity. We have accounting and financial reporting, including regulatory reporting. We have procurement to pay. We have financial performance management, and we have the accounting and financial reporting.
What were the main issues that you wanted to solve using technology inside the financial department?
What we are seeing is that there's been a rapid development in terms of what the regulators are asking for, and they're increasingly demanding, notably in terms of data and in terms of the granularity of data that they are requiring. This is also having a knock-on effect on the group's finance and risk information systems and how those need to develop, and notably to move more towards solutions based around sort of, for example, data lakes and data marts. A good example, there's a report which is called Credit, which is basically a statistical report for the European Central Bank around loans. And this is very granular. The data sets that we work with include tens of millions of data points. And it's a good example of the sort of size of data that we now have to work with. And this combined obviously with the changes in the group's risk ecosystem, finance risk ecosystem, and the move more towards a sort of data lake type model, meant that we were very just looking for solutions that enabled us to work more effectively and efficiently with data.
What made you choose a data analytics tool in order to grow the efficacy of the financial department, and why did you pick Alteryx specifically?
In order to sort of address this change, we were looking at the way we were working, and what we saw was that fundamentally everything we do in terms of reporting on the regulatory side was very similar. It broke down basically into 4 main steps. The first of each time was around the data integration, basically how we integrated the data that we required for the reporting or the reports that we produce out of Bucharest. The second was around how we transform the data in order to be able to put it into the different reporting templates that we need to submit. There was also around how we control the data to make sure that the data was accurate, consistent and plausible. And there was also around how we then sort of certify and analyze that data in order notably to give our partners reassurance that we are reporting accurately what we need to report. From that standpoint, we were looking for a solution that enabled us to basically adapt this approach to everything we were doing. And at the same time, one which is compatible with the sort of target solution of working with, for example, a data lake. And we looked at different solutions on the market. Notably, one of our historical partners had experience using Alteryx in the US. and we had some very good feedback we saw around the tool. And that gave us the impetus to start using this specific application, which is also well rated by different providers such as Gartner, for example. And that's what started us on our Alteryx journey.
You chose Alteryx in order to use data analytics to improve regulatory reporting. But which was the effect it had when you started using the solution?
We saw from the outset that we were looking to automate some of the sort of low value added, more repetitive tasks that we were involved in production. And the idea was to try to refocus our teams on more sort of value added work, notably around analysis, data analysis. And at the first instance, in terms of how we were tracking the impact of the tool, it was essentially focused around efficiency gains, basically how much time we were freeing up through the use of the tool. And since we started deploying it in 2020, we've made around 1,800 person days in terms of efficiency gains, which we've been able to reinvest either in other activities or in able to absorb new work without having to hire new resources. And we started to see a lot of other benefits which aren't directly related to pure efficiency gains. First, we've seen a very good impact on employee engagement and the motivation of teams to work with the tool. And we've seen that people who are actually working with the tool, they don't want to go back to working with Excel after they've experienced the work with Alteryx. We've also seen how it's helped us reduce operational risk, because we no longer are doing manual tasks, we're actually automating the tasks. And particularly when you're working to very tight deadlines, where you have a lot of manual work, it tends to increase the operational risk. So this is one way we've seen how it's reduced that aspect. We've also seen benefits around the ownership of the processes that are offshored to Bucharest, to the shared service center. By building what we've termed our sort of production line model, which is a relatively generic model which we use for all our reports, we've intended to increase the ownership, because the production lines are developed and maintained wholly by the teams based in Bucharest. On top of the ownership, we've also seen benefits in terms of basically preparing the teams for the way in which the industry is evolving. Notably, as I mentioned, this increasing focus on working with very granular data. And we've seen that there's been a sort of concomitant increase in the sort of data capabilities of the teams. And we've also seen benefits in terms of finding more frugal and innovative solutions to, for example, more traditional IT solutions. We had one example, to give a case, where we had an initial proposal, which is very much a traditional IT solution to replace the tool for one of the subsidiaries we were covering. And instead of a project which would have cost around 630,000 euros, taken 2 years, we were able to deliver something within 4 months at a cost of 33,000 euros using our Alteryx production line model. So this also enables us to contribute to the transformation of the group's finance and risk ecosystem.
And what kind of results had the use of Alteryx for the financial department, and what kind of insights can be extracted from the platform and using it?
So over and above, as I mentioned, the sort of efficiency gains that I cited earlier, we've also, as I mentioned, seen a very strong impact on employee engagement and also how it's helped us to reduce attrition. Because this is also one, when I arrived in Bucharest, one of the main focuses was also to stabilize the platform. What we've seen over the sort of 3 years we've been using Alteryx is that the attrition rate within the regulatory reporting team dropped from 42% to around 12%. And we've also seen a big increase in employee engagement, which over the same period rose from 58 points to 84 points based on an annual employee barometer survey, which is run by the group. And while obviously it's not purely related to the deployment of Alteryx, based on feedback we've had from the different teams, it's definitely a contributing factor in producing this improvement in employee engagement and motivation. And this also echoes what we've heard from other companies who are also using the tool, that they've seen this positive impact on employee morale. What we've also seen is that it's helped us to move more rapidly in adapting to regulatory changes. And we've had a bit of a snowball effect. What I think is probably one of the more innovative aspects of how we've deployed it is that we have this, as I mentioned, this production line model. And the idea was to create a sort of modular library of components that we could reuse across all our different reports. As I mentioned, we have this approach based on 4 standard sort of macro processes, which are the same across everything we do. And by creating a modular library of components that we can basically pull off the shelf and then piece together in order to adapt them to each of the individual reports, we were able to move much faster now, because we now have a significant library of bricks. It's a sort of Lego type approach to building out models for regulatory reporting.
And how do you develop and test Alteryx workflows in order to implement them inside the organization?
What we've seen is that the deployment of this sort of data-enabled strategy has brought about a sort of a much more transformative change to the department than simply deploying a tool. And in fact, we've changed completely the way we're set up. In particular, we've been working with principles from agile development. We've notably based ourselves in large part on the Spotify model, which they deployed, I think, from about 2012, to help to introduce agile at scale within the Spotify platform. It seems a very massive leap in terms of comparisons, but I'll try to explain. In terms of the Spotify approach, there are 4 main building blocks. The first are squads. And in fact, what we've set up is squads at the level of the different production teams. So we will have, for example, a production team dedicated to FinRep or financial reporting. We'll have a production team dedicated to co-rep or common solvency ratio reporting. Both are sort of two of the principal types of reporting done for the European Central Bank. We'll have a team for credit reporting. And within each of these teams, we'll have a squad of Alteryx users who will basically design, develop, test, and put into production the workflows for that particular team. At the same time, we have the tribe, which is at the level of the regulatory reporting department. And within the Alteryx tribe, we have all the squads who contribute, and where we share, obviously, best practices. We share the different modules that are developed so that they can be reused. We then have chapters, which are teams which have very specific competencies and work across the different squads. So, for example, we have one chapter which is focused on data controls and analytics, and they bring their expertise to all the different production teams. And we have a transversal team which brings specific expertise around business process reengineering. And because we've taken a holistic approach to the way we've deployed Alteryx, this also includes the reengineering of the processes before they're migrated to our production line model. And then lastly, I would say that there is, within Spotify model, there's the notion of guilds. And for us, the guild is more at the level of, in the first instance, SGGSC, which is a solution centers both in Romania, but also our center in India. And there we're obviously sharing what we develop, best practices across SGGSC, and then more broadly across the group, because we're very closely collaborating with the group, so that obviously we share best practices developments, and even the maintenance of certain workflows are split between platforms.
You mentioned about engagement. And how do you attract all stakeholders from the company to embrace the change and the new technologies?
I think change is always something which is very, it can be disconcerting, and it can generate anxiety for certain people. So I think it's very important to embrace change by showing the positive side of change. What we've strived from the outset is to show to users, to all our teams, the benefits of working with Alteryx, how it enables them to get rid of some of the sort of more repetitive, if you want, the more boring tasks, and focus on the more value-added, interesting activities. We're also seeing how our use of Alteryx, how what we've started to build out is enabling us to attract more value-added work. We are notably starting to work, for example, around ESG reporting, which is environmental, social and governance reporting, which is an emerging area for banks. And there's strong interest to sort of build out the capabilities in this area. And this is something where Alteryx is very useful because it enables us to work very easily with sort of multiple heterogeneous data sources. Another key aspect of our model is because we are what we term data source agnostic, it's very easy for us to connect our production lines to multiple data sources in whatever different type of format. So this is what we've tried to do, is really to show the benefits. We've also had the luck to be able to work hand in hand with our business partners. As I mentioned, one of our historical business partners gave us the initial impetus to start us on our Alteryx journey. And with all the partners now, even when they're transferring new activities, we're transferring them directly onto our Alteryx production line model. And we are working directly with them to make sure that the transition moves smoothly. And we also see that it helps us to really understand what our partners want, because if we have to map and model the processes in Alteryx, we really embed the knowledge of their processes within our organization. So we're seeing also benefits there. And I'll say last but not least, there is the need to work very closely with IT. This is something which, even when we've talked with other companies, they've repeatedly said it's very difficult sometimes because there may be impressions that Alteryx is stepping on the toes of IT. What I would say here is that we are very lucky that with the IT teams who serve the regulatory reporting department out of Bucharest, we work hand in hand with them. And in fact, within our Alteryx tribe, within the regulatory reporting department, they're in fact directly integrated. And we work very closely with them in deploying solutions for our different partners.
What are the main pieces of advice that you would give to any other company that wants to adopt new technologies in order for them to convince the employees to embrace them, to use them, to be open to this change you mentioned?
As I mentioned, I think it's very important to communicate on the benefits so that they can see how it helps them in their, on their day-to-day activities, but also more broadly speaking, I would say in their sort of long-term career prospects. As I mentioned from the outset, with Alteryx, it has accompanied this sort of change in the sort of regulatory reporting sort of domain towards something which is much more data intensive. And I think what we're seeing, for example, if we look at the department I work with, the teams are now working much more, I would say, at the intersection of data and regulatory reporting. And while 3 years ago, it was very much regulatory reporting profiles, now what we're seeing is that we have a very complementary mix of data and regulatory reporting expertise. I'm very lucky to work with some extremely talented people in Bucharest through the shared service center. In addition, I think what they're seeing is that because data is something which is much more generic than regulatory reporting, by developing these sort of skills, they're also enhancing their own career development opportunities, because it's something which is much more easily transferable. And it's also helping us on the recruitment side, for example.
What are the cybersecurity and regulatory requirements software must respect in order to be used in the business solution group?
The sort of financial services sector is, there was a recent study for, I think, 2022, where it said, I think the sector is the second most prone to cyber attacks amongst all the sort of sectors worldwide. I think it accounted for around 19% of all cyber attacks in 2022. And obviously, everything we deploy, we have to make sure that it's wholly compliant with the security standards, which are determined by the group's information security division in Paris. And here is one of the areas where we work very closely with our IT colleagues. As an example, we have also deployed alongside Alteryx a cloud-based solution for regulatory horizon scanning, termed Requirement 1. And this is something which involves a proprietary data lake in the cloud. And we have been working during the deployment with our IT colleagues in Bucharest to make sure that the deployment was fully compliant with all the security standards, with security requirements. They were instrumental in helping us to implement the solution very quickly. And they're also working with us on some of the other areas which we're looking at moving forward. We are notably now looking at some solutions, for example, around machine learning using Alteryx, which again involves us working very closely with the IT colleagues. And we're even starting to look at potential uses around artificial intelligence linked to our regulatory horizon scanning, notably to find ways to integrate in a much faster way regulatory changes into our production lines built on Alteryx.